Dave Cowen, thank you so much for being here on the Woo Report. Really happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. This is a dream come true to see you doing this work. You're so good for
Thank you,
it
Dave.
and so ready to contribute to community. So thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Well, okay,
Yeah,
so a little background on us. I've known you for almost 2 decades.
I
Isn't that
know.
crazy?
Wow.
You grew
Yeah.
up with my husband and you lived in LA with
Yep.
us. You've always been someone who's been able to cut through the noise, as they say, because you are genuinely curious about people, about relationships, about connections of all types. You're also Ivy League
Thanks.
educated, so you're just super smart.
Yeah.
I just feel like
No,
that's
no,
no, I
I
feel
think
like it's
I've learned a
notable.
lot of that, but yeah, it is. You have to balance the rational with the irrational when you're working with the woo, right? I mean,
Well,
otherwise you can
exactly.
go too far down the to the irrational path. So you got to
Well,
have some reason involved. Yeah.
exactly. You have been interested in unseen energies and you kind of like studied them, I feel like, for a while. When you get into
Yeah.
one, you kind of go deep into one. And, I do the same thing. I kind of study a lot of them and have looked through a lot of them. But you, because you're super smart brain, have also, you remember all the nuanced details about the rising signs and the different parts of human
Well,
design, just
yeah.
everything. You kind of like remember it all.
Thank you for believing in me. Sometimes I don't believe myself, but I was gonna say that one thing about that is if you talk about astrology, so like my ninth house is the house. It's all of our houses of philosophy, study, academia, and I have Saturn there. So Saturn is like kind of like a taskmaster. It makes you want to put a lot of energy and work into that. So whether that was academia when I was younger or becomes my own searching now with different fields, like yeah, like wherever Saturn is for you is gonna like have a lot of like energy in that house. So um, that's one way of talking about it. Another way is just like I became obsessed with learning about myself because I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing with my life, like in just at a personal level. And so the more that I learn, the more that I change for the better. And so this is really helping me. So I'm going to keep doing this. So I think that's like maybe the illogical reason. Some people think astrology is logical. Some people think, but maybe just the hard work like pays off. And I think people can relate to that. So I think what's cool about your podcast, it seems like, is you're finding the balance. You're making this successful for people who maybe wouldn't consider it, but you're also saying like, why is this helpful? This is helpful because you're looking at me like I look a lot different than we did in LA. Like I was like 50 more pounds, and that comes from spiritual work, and then it pays off in the physical world too.
Well, I love it. Thank you for being here to tell us all the things that have helped you because I feel like it might help other people. So glad you're
Yeah,
here to do it too.
exactly. Helping other people. Yeah.
All right. I love what you're doing on your Substack and your Substack, one of your Substacks. There's multiple, right? Is there multiple?
There are two. Yeah, it's still.
I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. Like there are multiple Substacks that you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah,
One of them that
yeah,
you've been doing for a while is
yeah.
Shuffle Synchronicities. And
Sure.
we're going to get into exactly what that is. But I love the idea of a synchronicity just in general, in life, in spirituality, not in spirituality. Like I feel like we would maybe consider, and you're going to help me here because you're an expert in this, but is a synchronicity also what we would call a coincidence for someone who's maybe non-spiritual? Or like what is a synchronicity?
I think you're good enough to call it a coincidence because that's one of the definitions. It just means a meaningful coincidence. So if you want to add meaning to your life, more to your life, you can refer to them as a meaningful coincidence, and that helps you make that bridge between the more logical and the more spiritual. When the external world interacts with your internal world, that's one definition. And a technical one might be that it's not causal in the sense that like there's not some sort of reason that's logical, but it's because whatever gives you joy in life, you're going to find a lot of synchronicities there. I think that's an important thing to think about. Is like, and I think music gives joy to so many people. So, like, what I was finding was that, wow, every time I'm like thinking about a song as I'm living my life, it's likely that there's an overlap between the two things. And when I was younger, I would point those out to people in my community or my life, and they would be like, "Well, that doesn't mean anything. How could that's just a coincidence?" But as you're saying, if you build on it, build on the meanings, it just keeps building, and you realize that's actually all around you. And I think Carl Jung would say that for people who are paying attention, they're available all around you, all times.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, have I experienced the synchronicity?
Yeah.
Has everyone experienced the synchronicity, would you say? Of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you feel a coincidence, the fact that you're even noticing that it's a coincidence, that makes it meaningful. Otherwise, you wouldn't have noticed it. That's my point is that they're always happening around you, and so the more that you tune into that frequency, you're going to see that they're happening more and more. At first, when you notice, it could be surprising, as if like, oh well, that's rare or that doesn't happen very often. But then when you really become aware of how much it's happening, it almost becomes like a joke. Like it's like every second it's happening almost. And that's it's just an idea between congruence between the outer world and inner world is like correspondence was the thing back in the past. So like nature is very correspondent. So if you see like in literature, there's often like these symbols you read about, like oh why was that wolf there in that scene in that book? That's because in reality that would happen a lot and still does. Like if you notice a hummingbird, if you notice animals that are tuned to you, making helping you guide you, that was a thing that humans use for knowledge that still exists. I mean, we live in cities, we live in suburbs with less animals, but still all around you. Same with nature in terms of the moons and the stars. Like all those things are tuned with you, and same with music. I mean, I saw this meme yesterday. It was like, why did when we come up with the idea of that we when we knew about that the air had ether had frequencies in it, why did we fill it up with music? We made radio. That was one of the first inventions. We learned that like all the air has these waves and particles in it. We put music into it. And so now, so radio was one of the things that, you see in movies. A song would come on in a radio of a car that would make sense with the movie. And you think, oh, that's just art. But no, that was happening in reality. And that became art for a reason because people are just echoing it into their movies. And so now we're even more digital. We have these algorithms. And algorithms are numbers. And so numbers are another main frequency for synchronicities. Like they're really strongly tied to the spiritual world. There's a whole talk about numerology and enneagram. There's a whole lineage throughout history of numbers being tied not just to their physical meanings as universal physical meanings that like 1+1 = 2 in every culture, but in almost every culture the same spiritual means every number is the same as well. In China, in South America, in Greece, people didn't overlap necessarily too. So it's a long-winded answer.
So good.
Hopefully it's okay. Yeah.
No, it's so good. Okay. So let's talk about then what you're doing with Shuffle Synchronicities. So the idea is that we're asking the universe a question. I mean, I like this because it's kind of like an oracle deck. It's a similar.
It is. Yeah.
It's so
it
if
is.
you ever use an oracle deck, you're kind of taking an oracle deck and you're shuffling it, you're putting your energy on it, and then you're kind of asking the universe a question. You're picking a card, and that card, the idea is that the universe helped you pick that card for guidance on whatever you're asking about. And so the idea is that we're finding, as you say in your bio, the spirit in the algorithm by asking a question.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
shuffling a playlist.
exactly.
And then we're asking a specific question, and then we're shuffling the playlist, and then we're getting a song. And in that song, we're looking at the lyrics, we're looking at the title, we're looking at the feel, and we are going to use our inner guidance to then make a synchronicity of that with whatever we asked or whatever is currently going on with our life. So can you give us an example of a recent song that you've done this to, or a question? Can you give us an example of something that you've done recently?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I mean, I have a journal where I do this daily. I think it's cool because you can make this a daily practice, and you can, people love journaling as kind of like as a therapy these days. Like Julia Cameron's really into that. That's coming back in vogue. For instance, something's going on in my life. I couldn't figure out what I need to do. I couldn't get my work done that day. I couldn't email anybody. I couldn't phone. And I just started walking with a copy of this book that I need to give to someone that I didn't realize until I started walking that it was them I need to give it to. And then I dropped it off for them. And then I was like, okay, how does that feel? Like, what was that a good choice? Or like, you want to usually like make the shuffle before you make the choice. But in this case, I did it afterwards. And then I got this song by Johnny Cash called Jesus Cleans the Temple. And so it was like, to me, a very, strong synchronicity that was the right thing to do. You need to clean your temple of what was blocking you, your ego, from making the business choice you need to do, because you need to clear the personal relationship with this book. And so that was a really strong synchronicity. The next day, I was really wrapped in the opposite direction. I was really wrapped up in my ego and really pushing too hard, probably emailing people for this book. And then I did a shuffle and I got this Allen Ginsberg poem called Bengal Paraphrases Poem Series. And it was all about like how Allen Ginsberg is like a really spiritual beat poet, but he's like obsessed with his ambition and has like has to get somewhere in an hour, and so it was like just kind of these reminders of like guiding you. It was like, oh, okay, the first day you need to do this personal thing before you can get to work. The next day was like, okay, now you're overworking. How do you tone it back so you don't bother people with your ambition? And so I think it's this way the universe is constantly sending you information to help you guide your life a little bit better on your path, or a lot better on your path, depending on how you think about it. So those are two recent ones. And I think the journal is helpful too, because when you ask me that question, my mind at least can't remember all of the shuffles from the last, even yesterday or last week. But having the journal allows you to keep a practice going, and then you can really look back. And then also with the journal too, it's like you can see in your history a song will come up like, oh, that song came up maybe some point last year. What was it in reference to? And it was like another example was like I was thinking about what do I need to write next. I was getting this other idea, and then I was like, let me shuffle. Maybe that'll help me think it out. And it was a song related to a post, a journal post from the past about tennis. I was like, oh, I need to focus on the tennis versus pickleball script I'm doing.
Yes.
That one's going to be a nice, refreshing one instead of this other one that's
can't wait for that.
So it was like, yeah, exactly. People love, that's one of our
we love it. We love racket sports.
Yeah.
Yes.
And exercise is very, very like physical and spiritual at the same time. Like the more you exercise, I think the better off you are mentally, spiritually, all those things too. So that's another like thing in your toolbox that's, very basic. But anyway, so that's a long-winded answer about examples. But yeah, that's a couple examples.
So you have a Shuffle Synchronicities playlist on Spotify that anyone can follow or join and use, and that is primarily where you shuffle every day.
Well, what's tricky about that is, so Spotify limits your playlist to 10,000. So you can that you can share with someone else. So I have one that's 10,000 people that they can use, but I also have one that's like well over 100,000 that I actually use. Like the Like song playlist can be infinite. In fact, I met someone online who has like millions of songs, and I would love to have that. My goal would be to have every song recorded in history on the Spotify playlist, because I used to like music in the sense of music critic being what something's good, something's bad. Now, if you just go into it believing that everything is good, you're going to enjoy it, I think, or everything has meaning for you. I think it's way more interesting than like what your subjective taste are, because all our taste is very subjective.
Right.
But yeah, you can definitely go into my. We can set up into the show notes like a link. They can go and use that playlist. But I think it's also important about building your own. I mean, it seems like maybe you work with this as well, and we've known each other for a while, and you're really supportive of the Shuffle, one of the first subscribers, and that was really amazing. Thank you. And I love it. And do you build your own playlist? Do you have your own that you use?
So I don't. And I'll tell you that I have kind of a different synchronicity that happens with me with music. That I don't know that I've ever told you about this before, but
perfect timing now. Here we go.
Perfect timing. So I feel since my accident and my whole awakening, I have often always like songs pop into my head. Songs pop into my head all day, all the time for different,
that's
whatever.
Another way. And there's a reason that's happening. Yes.
So I've been told by a medium to listen to these songs. And, so I started paying attention, and my grandmother, who passed away, 12-ish years ago, she was super into music, and she, could sit down at the piano and play anything. And
wow.
I have just so I kind of have, I feel like any songs that pop into my head are kind of a sign from her in a way that it's also a guidance. So it's like, what song pops in? It's different songs. Okay, but right now, Dave, in this time of my life, this has been happening a lot because Cynthia Erivo and the Wicked soundtrack has been the soundtrack of my life for the past several months. I just feel like it's always in there. But I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night and I hear her voice. It's what an angel. We love waking up to hear
she's
Cynthia.
Amazing.
I know she's amazing.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But so there's two songs that are often in my head. One of them is The Wizard and I. It's called The Wizard and I. I don't know if you're familiar with Wicked. But
okay, I've watched it, but I'm not as familiar as that song.
The Wizard and I.
What's the theme of it? Yeah,
it's Cynthia is just she's musing about how she's going to meet the Wizard of Oz, and this is the dream she's been waiting for. And she believes at this moment that like the wizard is going to help her in some way.
Yeah.
But for me, obviously, we know at the end, and this is not a spoiler because it happens at the end. We know the wizard has no real power, right? The power is all within Alphaba. Like the power is
Yeah.
all within her. And
Hmm.
so when I hear the wizard and I know that in that moment, or this is my sign now to myself that I'm supposed to be reaching for the highest version of myself in that moment. It's kind of like a
Yeah.
cue for me to reach for the wizard inside myself, to reach for like that highest power, most powerful version of myself, and to
I
act
love
there,
that. Yeah.
reach for it. Then the other one, I mean, the soundtrack is great. If you haven't listened, like as soon as
Get
we're done
into it
with
more.
this,
Yeah. Yeah.
defying gravity is like the famous one
That
from.
one I remember really well. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, oh my
That
gosh.
was
So, and that one
such
is
a great
like, and
song.
that one for me, when that pops in, it's like, take the leap, take the jump,
Yep.
trust yourself.
Like what?
Like that's like kind of what when it starts playing, I'm like, okay, we're going to, cause music, when it pops into my head, it's very meditative for me. When I'm singing something, I'm also thinking, I'm humming, I'm going about my day, but it's going around in my head, and it's meditative. And so I'm usually thinking about other things while I'm also humming it. So it feels
Yeah.
like it all makes sense. Anyway,
That
that's
is
long winded, but
no. That is definitely the way I think about synchronicity too with music is that if it pops into your head or if like it's at the tip of your tongue, whatever you're thinking of that song, bring it into your consciousness. Look at the lyrics, play it for yourself, study it, do exactly what you did. That is an essential practice that you've developed for yourself that is guiding you into great places. I mean, you jumped into doing this podcast. You are
sure
like,
did.
I'm the wizard. Like I can be a podcaster. I can do a podcast about woo. I can do this, and you are bringing the magic to it. So like, these songs are guiding you in a really positive direction. I mean, just looking at the smile on your face and the joy that I have participating in this and the community you're growing, like it's great. So
Dave, thank
follow
you
the
so
music.
much. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're the best. You're an old soul. You're a guide for me in this life, even if you don't realize it. After the
Well, I think
accident,
our oh yeah, man.
well,
You
you
taught
were
me so
just
much too.
yeah. No, I mean,
Please go ahead. We can.
you would send me quotes or like the Enneagram test, and like it wasn't over. You weren't overdoing it, but I was laid up in bed. I could not move, and you were just like really helping me with these supportive tools that will help me kind of peel back the layers and help me process this whole big catastrophic event that just happened, with being just so supportive, helping me kind of look inward with these outward modalities what's another a better
Aw.
word for modalities, but
No,
but
modality is great. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but
I
you
mean,
were so
I,
helpful.
I think the thing too is like what's easy to talk to you about is that you are so joyous. Like my first memory of you, it wasn't the first time we met, but it was when we were dancing at my party at my family's house.
Oh my
Like
gosh,
when we
yes.
like, you remember that?
I
Like
do.
you're just a very fun person, no matter what you do. Whether you're bringing that to dancing, whether you're bringing that to more Hollywood type work, or you're bringing it to spiritual work. And
Thanks,
so
Steve.
even to your recovery, like you brought a lot of joy to your recovery, which is not always the case, as I'm sure you're aware, doing your work with Isaiah Project and other places. Like it doesn't have to always go that way. That someone can bring that there. And I was looking at your astrology chart, and we don't have to jump too far across to that already. But your first house, your first house is your house of yourself. I don't know if you're aware of that, what that means. So it's your self house. So if you have a planet there, that's going to affect that house. And I was thinking about it. That's your body, that's your physical appearance, and so that's also your rising sign. So your Libra, which is the sign of beauty, because it's ruled by Venus. So people look at you, you're obviously a beautiful person, and also like it's a very talkative, diplomatic, like sociable, and a lot of justice. But also in your first house is Pluto, and Pluto is where there's transformation and death and destruction and change. And so Pluto is in your first house, so that's probably related to like your physical body being harmed in that way is a very Pluto life or death. And the fact that you went through a death experience really helped me because you had like a really like when my dad died, when I had my own awakening, that was a once removed, whereas you had your own really really personal experience with death. And the fact that you came out of it knowing things that I could never know really helped me understand that what I believed about my dad, what I believed about all of our potential deaths is a true thing because you came, so close to it and able to see so much in it. And so that was, I mean, you're the only one who I don't know who's had that experience, and I trust you so much because I've known you for so long. And I trust Matt, your husband, so much that
Yeah.
like your validation really really means a lot. Like it's just, I think that's what's cool too is you're building this like community for people that are like local for you and growing. And looking at your chart again, you have a lot of third house planets, and that's the house of communication, but also the house of like siblings and neighbors and like local communities. And you're like a hero in where I grew up now, where you're growing back with Matt, growing that community in terms of social work and spiritual work and just. So anyway, I'm talking now too much
Oh my
too,
gosh, you're so
but
sweet
yeah, I
though.
guess
I'm
it's
like,
a
it's so
podcast. We're
nice
supposed
to
to talk,
hear.
right?
Like words of affirmation is my love language, Dave. So
Okay,
feeling loved. Thank
well, we're
you.
doing it.
Well, I mean, we're obviously in a soul family, but you touched on a little bit about your own kind of spiritual awakening. Can you get into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it's also honestly related to the music too, is because and dreams and things. I mean, yeah, I think it's like when someone dies in your life, it can radically change you. And I'll take a step back and also just say that like I have like a diagnosis of bipolar disorder from when I was 21, and I think about that differently now that it being like a dual thing between like it being like a gift and also a curse, and that and going back to the shuffle for a second, like when you have extreme emotionality, that creates more synchronicities. Whether and that could be any kind of emotion, both good and bad. Like they talk about like this. Paul Lee is this guy who's a physicist who worked with Carl Jung on synchronicity, and he was a they call this the Paul Lee effect. He was a very very emotional guy, and Jung actually helped him kind of balance out. But like when he was very emotional, he would kind of create these synchronicities around him, and that's something that happens is that if you want to have more synchronicities, if you have affectivity, if your affect is really high, they're going to happen more and more. So if something traumatic happens in your life, like if your dad dies or if you go through something, you're more likely to attract these synchronicities because you're having high affect. And what that does is it does feel kind of manic or insane, but what it does is actually helps guide you because it's almost like the universe is saying like this is how you're going to intuitively get through this process that's otherwise you might not be able to get through in a logical way because you're not thinking very logically because your affect is so high. We're going to guide you in other ways. And so there's actually this book I was mentioning on text by Chris Mackey. He's like actually he's a therapist, so he was able to see as he was having his own awakening due to trauma that there's a positive response to hypomania, that hypomania can be integrative. It can be something that guides you along the way, so that even though people can look at you as self-referential, they can say these are delusions, these are you're making things out of, you're making meaning out of the world that's not there, and we want to question this. It was really when I was 21 I thought, oh, only I am doing this, and then it became like an ego inflation. But when I was older and had a much more education experience, it was like, oh, everybody can have this experience, everybody is having this experience potentially, and so you're not special, and this is not like God and only you, it's God and everybody, or however you want to define that for yourself, universe, that kind of thing. So that's another long-winded discursive answer, but yeah, I think in terms of music, like at the time I was with someone and I was pointing out like how music kept interacting with our life or TV or the newspaper, and I could see how there was a meaning for the world that was just as true for whoever that was for, and also for me or for us, and that person and other people, not just them, it just would be like that's not true, and that means you're sick. But as I've integrated more and more, I'm able to kind of hold both realities and kind of live in the what's maybe the spiritual or the internal world and also the external world, and know that both are true and both are kind of a symphony by the universe that's designed for both for you and for everybody else. So hopefully, hopefully
A
that's a good
symphony of
explanation.
the
I don't know.
universe, Dave. A symphony of the universe. I love it.
Well, it's so well directed. Like you can, because I mean, the Greeks would be like, if you have an answer to a question, go walk through the town, listen to the next person who says something out loud. That word or that sentence will guide you because God is that good, basically. Like that's why, like it's like
That's
that's
what
what
the
I do
Greeks
too. Like
did.
now,
That's what it's
the
like
Greeks
ancient. Are you
did it.
talking about like the Greek? What do you
Ancient,
mean? Like
ancient Greeks.
I've never
Yes.
heard this. Where did you learn this?
This is
Is
a
this
great
is
book. It's
this
like, yeah, I'll
oh,
send you the book. This is another, yeah, this is a real
that's
thing. It's
wild.
I can look up the word for it, but yeah, because they didn't have technology the way we do. Now it's a lot of technology. Now it's a lot of like go to your Instagram feed and like refresh with an intention, and the first thing that pops up, like it could be very weird. It could be just a meme, but that will have some meaning for you that you can use to guide you in your circumstance. So like the internet, we're walking into the age of Aquarius in terms of like the Pluto. So Capricorn was in Pluto. Pluto was in Capricorn for from 2008 to 2024, 2025 now. And so we saw a lot of change in Capricorn aspects where a lot of like banks and institutions, like the media, traditional media, everything's like really kind of turned around. And so some people are saying that's going to happen with technology in terms of like you're seeing with AI potentially being the downsides of some of that, but also the positives are that like we're really connected and that in ways that the spirit is living in the algorithm and it can like help you there too, and but also can can guide you in weird ways too, but it can also help you. So you have to have set intention when you're in there, and be like true to what you like you said, your higher self. Like you thought, what's the wizard in me wants? Like there's definitely the wizard is good and bad. I mean, the Wizard of Oz and Wicked, like
Sure.
he has his flaws for sure. I mean, he
Sure.
kind of goes down a bad path in the first half. I don't know what happens in the second half.
Well, what's your spiritual belief system? How would you describe that?
I would say the thing that was interesting was I didn't have one before my dad died. I think that's going back to that question was I was kind of a lazy agnostic and I was really just didn't have any systems. I didn't have much ethics at that point, honestly. And that transformation made me go searching. I had stopped reading books. I mean, I was an English major. I was a writer who was reading screenplays and reading like books for screenplays for a job. And so I finally quit that part of the job and just focused on a different part of that job at that company. And I started reading on my own. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like there's so much that I have missed for the last 5 years. I didn't read for 5 years, which is crazy and embarrassing, but it's the case. And then when you read and you're like, oh, there's all these, like you said, systems. So like the Enneagram was one that I found that was extremely helpful. And it's a psychological and spiritual system. So psychology sometimes with CBT is like this behavioral therapy that when I was first diagnosed, they tried to put me in, and I didn't really respond to it because it's very behavioral and it's positive for that regard. Like it helps to help people, but it doesn't believe in the spiritual half of life a lot of times. Like it doesn't say like so sometimes the meaning behind these things doesn't apply. It's like, oh, do this workbook or do this like restructuring of your brain, in this very like logical way, but it's not like putting you in this heroic thing where you're like in relationship with everybody in the universe and with God, and that and so the Enneagram, I think when I found that, it made a lot of sense because it had this polarity. It was like I could see my darkness. I have a lot of Scorpio as well. You're a Scorpio, so I have a lot of Scorpio, and it was like, okay, envy for the 4 is the negative and equanimity is the positive. And so I thought it was a 4 for a while, and I had a lot of extreme envy over people in my profession who were doing better than me, and I had a lot of melancholy over that. Those are kind of the negatives of the 4. But having equanimity in that regard is in the sense of like being calm in the storm of whatever is presented with you, finding that as a value to kind of whenever I was feeling envy to go in that other state, that allowed me to kind of find balance. And I thought of myself as a 7, and then it's gluttony and sober joy. Those are the 2 poles. And so that helped me quit, a lot of things. So that was drinking, cannabis, food, added sugars, processed food, fried foods, pornography, quitting that, and then so just thinking about whenever the gluttony would arise, be like, okay, I need sober joy. So what is sober joy? And just pursuing that. And then now I'm thinking about it in terms of a 6, which is fear and courage. And so this is going back to synchronicity for a second. We both love Vampire Weekend. I was walking in my neighborhood and I saw him, and I passed by him.
You
and I
saw
was like,
so you saw Ezra Koenig,
saw
who is
Ezra
the lead
Koenig,
singer
yeah.
of
Lead singer
Vampire
of Vampire Weekend,
Yes.
yeah. And I was like, he's one of my favorite living artists. I think his lyrics are incredible, and they're really helpful during a lot of my own episodes or synchronicities. And I paused. And I was like, I was behind him. He didn't
This is
quite
such a
see
good
me. I was like,
sighting,
what
by
can
the way. I just feel like it needs to be
I know
pointed
he's
out,
like,
though. This
yeah.
is this is an LA sighting that is like, oh my gosh. I feel
I
like you see
know.
a lot of people in LA. You see a lot of famous people walking around LA, but Ezra is
But
such
like
a good one.
Ezra, I know, and also because Kids Who Rotisserie is where I went to eat like daily for 2 years, and it's like just the word kismet is another word for synchronicity. It's like a coincidence. That's another one of the word for that meaning. And so I pause, and there's this word kairos that this guy Chris Mackey talks about, which is like you have a synchronicity. It also is like you have to use it in that moment sometimes. So you have to find kairos is like the being in the right place at the right time and making a decision in that moment. And so I was thinking in my head, I was like, what should I talk to him about? I was like, well, I have this graphic novel about guns that I released last week. That's not really something he might be interested in necessarily. I wrote this Haggadah about Kanye that I like his music, but that's not directly him. But then I was thinking, like, Ezra is so good with music. He has his own podcast. He loves like talking about lyrics and just the meaning behind things. Has he ever practiced shufflemancy, which is kind of the bigger term for this? Like I call it shuffle synchronicities without realizing that on TikTok, now all these mostly women and witches and things like that are like practicing shufflemancy, which is comes from the word bibliomancy, which is people in the past would open up a Bible or a book and just pick a random passage, and that would be setting intention and coming up with a guidance answer. Now it's like shufflemancy is the word they use because it's shuffling instead of picking up a book randomly. So I just started talking to him about it. I said, "Have you heard of this?" And he was like, "No, that sounds interesting." I was like, "Well, I have this Substack. It was top 25 on NPR for a while, and like I do some podcasts, and I'd love to maybe have you on in some form." And he was like, "Yeah, I mean that might be good. Like there's seasons to this, but here's my press person information." And I took that and went with it. But in terms of like the Enneagram and Shuffle, like I had a lot of fear about going back there. I was like the old me wouldn't have gone. I would have just been like, oh, he doesn't want to talk to me. Like, why would he, that kind of thing. But then I thought at that moment, like, okay, tap into your sixness. Like, don't let the fear override your courage. Use your courage. Go up to him. He's your age. Like, he's literally your age. Like, he's your peer. Like, think about him like that. We're all humans. We're all God's children, people. I even said it to him. I was like, that's what your music's about. And he kind of smiled, and I tripped over something. I was like, but so it's a mix. So then, then I did a shuffle afterwards. So that's why I said I tripped because I was a little bit stormy, and I did a shuffle. Like, what did Ezra think of this? And I got this song by this artist called Stormy Six. Literally, that was the name of the artist. It's called Stormy Six. So I'm thinking about Enneagram Six. I was like, that's a real synchronicity, right? It's like I was being a
Yes.
little bit stormy. I was a Stormy Six, and the song is called Carmine, and the lyrics are like I won't read them all, but Carmine is like this character who's like a barber, a bricklayer, a smuggler who's like he's kind of like a beggar and kind of like a wild man and kind of a wild card, I would say, which I kind of am these days. I'm definitely a wild card, kind of an everyman. But he can sing, and he can like when he sings, he makes everybody one person. And so I was feeling like when I told Ezra about the shufflemancy, it was like, oh, this is something that Ezra doesn't know about music, and Ezra knows a lot about music. I mean, one of the
Yes.
best musicians in the world. But there's this
Yes.
thing that I know about music, and many people besides me know about this, that could help him, that could make him have a change in his life or his path or his way he makes music, and that interested him, and that could be something that I teach him that then he teaches everybody else, or like whoever is interested in his work can get guided by him. So it felt like in this moment, even though I am Carmine, even though I am this kind of like guy who's faded to a different existence than him in terms of celebrity and like and whatnot, like I can still have a role in the world that is as influential. And I think that's ultimately when I think of spirituality, it's like it's a way of dealing with whatever comes into your life and making it make sense so that it doesn't like harm you more than it should. It's like I'm supposed to experience this, whether that's an
Yes.
accident or that's
Yes.
a bipolar disorder or that's
Hmm.
like career failures and struggles. Like I'm supposed to go through this. I'm supposed to like have my Saturn, my ninth house, which is also publishing, and so like struggling to get things traditionally published. My graphic novel is not traditionally published; it's self-published, and being like that's okay. We're going to do it this way. Like it was successful in the past. I self-published with other books that I've done. So these are long-winded responses, but like Stormy Six is a really strong sign. Carmine, the song, um, and yeah. So I'll stop there for that answer.
But and so what are you
uh,
gonna do about
yeah.
it? What are you gonna do
Oh
about
yeah,
it?
yeah. I was just out there because we would love to like talk to you. I was like, you guys love Vampire as much as I do. Like whenever I'm in your house, always
Yeah.
playing Vampire Weekend.
Yeah. It's great.
We talked about This Life and like, that song in particular, a number of times. And you were like, hey, I got this great idea because you're a genius, you're a producer, you make things happen. You're like, we were already gonna do this podcast. It didn't happen because of the fires in LA. We were gonna do it.
We
I mean, we
were.
didn't feel like it because it was just so rough over here,
Yeah.
and we canceled it. But then you're like, you know what? We should reschedule the podcast for like right now and take this momentum and like share it with this PR person because I've done other podcasts for this on my own and someone else has had me as a guest, but like you are making something amazing happen here, and I feel really comfortable in this space, and we can show it off to Ezra and his community, his people, and get them excited about it as a potential thing for him to want to be engaged in. And so that was your idea. I mean, that is like me sharing what I'm going through, you coming up with something, you producing it, making it happen. So that's your genius right there.
I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but I'm really glad that we're talking about it because I feel like the synchronicities, this like shuffling music and getting guidance from something that is accessible to most everyone, I feel like and it's fun. Like that's the part of it.
It's
It's
so fun.
fun.
Yes.
It can be fun. It's not
Yeah.
like I think, and then
It's so fun.
and that's what I love about this space is that there's a lot of we've talked about this. There's like a lot of reverence around spirituality, which I also love, but I think it's that it kind of contributes to the eye rolls around woo woo culture when everyone's just like
Yeah.
like meditating and
No. Right.
and sitting in
Yeah.
silence and stillness. And I get it. Like we need all that. I love all of that too. But this is something that is so fun. It's just so fun to have a synchronicity.
Yeah, it
it's
is.
just fun.
And it's so fun for doing music too, because you can be like
Yes.
walking around and hear someone's car playing and you're just like,
Yes.
what does that mean? And that's fun. Like, and
All right. So
I don't
should we
know.
do one right
Yeah.
now? What should I?
Oh my
should we
gosh,
do
yeah,
one?
yeah, we
Let's
need
do
to
it
do it.
now.
We're running out of
Okay.
time and we gotta do it. Yes,
Let's
yes.
do one. So I'm gonna pull up your Shuffle Synchronicities playlist, which I
Oh
have
wow. Okay.
here, obviously.
Amazing.
Okay. So let me ask a question. It should be something like today, right? It should be something like very top of mind.
I think it should be like, honestly, and you don't have to do this, but what is the thing you don't want to say?
I mean, I'm scared about like this podcast.
So what are you scared about?
So
Talk
I'm
to me
just
for a second about it.
scared. Okay, so it's vulnerable. You're just putting yourself out
Yeah.
there.
Okay, this is, yeah.
And
This is the Enneagram 8 stuff.
Yeah, so
you're Enneagram 8, so vulnerability is like a difficult thing for you, but when you lean into it,
Yes.
it's positive. Yeah.
Right. Well, so I love being like one-on-one vulnerability is like pretty easy for me, I'd say. But this feels like
Yeah.
it's a bigger scale. And
Yeah, for sure.
it's just available out there in the world. And like, for example, the first episode's not even out yet. And
Yes.
I saw, it's just the trailer's out. And I saw there's 6 reviews on Apple Podcasts. And
What?
5 of them are 5 stars and 1's 4 stars. Like, why is there a
Okay.
4-star
Well,
review, Dave?
why is there a 4-star? That's insane. That's insane.
Which is fine. It's fine. Like, I laughed about it, but I'm also like, it's so interesting. Like, someone's trolling me already.
I know. That is. First of all, that's crazy that someone's trolling you. I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
But second
it's
of all,
fine.
you got a lot of 5 stars.
Yes.
A lot of 5 stars.
I
Also,
mean,
they could have
5.
trolled you a
It's
lot
probably
harder.
like my mom
they
and my
gave you a
dad.
4.
Yeah.
But they gave you a 4. It's like, it's a weird troll, At least the positive of that troll is like, it's not bringing you down that much. It's like, like most trolls would be like 1 or 0, but they're like, they give you a 4.
Like, obviously, it's like somebody that I know, right?
Or maybe they misclicked it. Let's be really generous and say it was like a misclick. Like maybe it was like an old aunt or something like that, like some of your mom's or dad's
I'm
friends. They just
literally
like
crying.
misclicked it.
I honestly like, but this is the moment. It's like I haven't put an episode out yet, but like I'm ready
funny.
to put myself out there, and it's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be for everyone,
Mhm.
and there will be a word of mouth vibe that's very positive, and there'll be a word of mouth vibe that's not as positive.
Oh, for sure.
And
But the word of mouth is going positive. Yeah, I think it's gonna be really positive.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think ultimately I know that this is what I need to do, and so here we are. We're gonna push
Yeah.
through it. We're gonna do it. But yeah, I mean, that's like the most vulnerable question I could ask today is around the success of this, or like what, then you're like, what is define success? I mean, we could go in all these different directions with it, but
Yeah.
so I don't know what the question should be. What
Sometimes
is,
I even just say like, what should I feel about moving into this next chapter of my life, or what should I, yeah,
oh, okay, I like that.
what can
I
be,
like that.
yeah, I can think about it like that.
Yeah, maybe just how
What,
should I feel about this next chapter, or
yeah, yeah, and maybe it'll just give you a really positive song that like you should feel good about it.
maybe it'll be
I
like
don't
something crazy. But let's do it now. Let's see. All right.
know. We just put a lot of pressure
So
on the universe.
yeah, I mean it's fine. All right, we can always cut this out, right?
It comes through. It comes through often when in the crucible it pays off usually. Think about the question and say it together. Yeah.
So yeah, so the question is, how should I be feeling moving into this next chapter with the podcast?
Yeah.
Is that specific
Yeah.
enough?
I love that.
All right, how
I'm
should I be
feeling,
feeling
yeah.
about it? All right. You ready, universe?
Oh, I'm at least. But
You are.
universe
Here we
too.
go. Here's the shuffle. Oh my God.
What is it?
Die slow.
Die flow?
Die slow.
Interesting. Okay, here's my initial thoughts. You had a near-death experience that you're in flow state when you're talking about it,
Yes.
and you're bringing people into flow state, and whatever it defines it as. Like for me, music flow state, and for a lot of people. But you had a death experience that brought you into flow state. I mean, it is like, what is it for you? And isn't the band Health? What's the
The
band?
band
What's
is
Die
health.
Flow?
The band is health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you're helping people with health by going through a death experience. I mean, weren't online for 2 years after your death experience. Now you're coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you go. I
Well,
did the thing where I analyzed it too quickly for you, and I just gave
no,
you my
I
answer.
mean, I
But you
love
should.
that you made
Yeah.
it so
Sorry.
positive. I initially was like, oh my gosh, this sounds dark.
You're scared for a second, but yeah, but that's okay. That's the initial vulnerability. But I think it's like the perfect song out of all those songs.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm into it.
instead of dying fast, better to die slow too. So anyway,
You know,
these are a lot of
this
explanations.
this really does go into the question that I'm trying to ask everyone on this podcast, which is, what do you think happens when we die? And I feel like this is the perfect thing to
Oh
end
my
on.
gosh, it is. That's what you told me. You're like, that is the question you want to ask everybody, right?
Yeah.
So there you go.
Here we go. I mean,
Wow.
we're talking
Okay,
about
I'm gonna
talking
answer
about
it
death or
then. Yeah.
dying. Like my documentary is all about death and dying, and I had a
Yes.
near death experience. Like, it does all track.
Like,
But
literally behind you is the Isaiah Project, your documentary
yes,
about death and dying.
yes. Okay,
Wow.
Dave, Cowen, what do you think happens when we die?
I believe strongly, based on your experience, what we talked about, and also my dad's experience, that some part of you stays on around the world and guides people in your life and has an influence. And I think it's a great thing. You're like almost free to act in other ways and guide. And I'm excited for it sometimes. Like, it's weird to say, but like, it's before I used to be petrified of death, and now sometimes I still am. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm often like, wow, what would be the next chapter? Like, how can I help people? And I think my dad is so happy helping me all the time. I think he's
Yes.
helping people in my life, like my mom and people we know, and it's my sister. And so, even though I want to die slow, like this song, and I want to have health, and I want to contribute in this way, I I'm fortunate to think, at least at this point in my life, that it would be a good experience to die too at some point. So that's my answer.
I love it. It's beautiful. I love it. We're
This
all
is
gonna die
so
slow.
fun.
This is so fun. Thank you for making that like heavy metal song make me feel okay.
Well, I think it's true. I think I don't know.
No, I like it now. I'm like sweating, but I like it now.
Good.
Yeah.
That's your vulnerability, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you're being so brave, and you're doing it, and I'm really proud of you.
Thanks, Dave.
So
Thank you.
good for you.
Thank you for being on this podcast with me. Thank you for chatting with me,
Yes.
being so open and being
Thank you
an
for
open book
inviting me.
yourself. And
Yeah.
for bringing the shuffle to everyone, because I feel like it's really powerful, and I think it's going to be
Thanks.
fun for people to try.
Yeah,
and
thanks
see what
for
they get.
contributing to everybody else from your point of view. You're gonna have such a big audience, like you're gonna take off, and then you're going to help people with these new modalities that you're exposing people to. So what you're doing is such a service for
Thanks,
our communities and humanity. I really believe it. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye, Laura.
If you want to do a shuffle with Dave's Spotify playlist, I've dropped a link in the episode description. Let me know what you get. I hope it's more upbeat than Die Slow. Anyway, thank you for listening. So grateful for you. Please subscribe, like, rate, and comment wherever you listened. New eps every Wednesday, and join the community at thewooreportpodcast.com. Thank you for being here and loving so hard on this little slice of magic. Bye.